And we're back. All right, good morning, everybody. Hopefully, everybody's okay this morning, feeling good. Don't have the COVID 19 or the brown bottle flu or the Chardonnay migraine this morning. Somebody shoot me a little chat saying that the audio's okay or not okay. We'll wait for a few more to sign on here, and then we'll get started in earnest here in just a bit. So, okay, cool. Everything was looking pretty good. I'm looking a little fuzzy on my end this morning. I don't know about you guys, but sound looks like it's doing okay. So, sound is better than the visual at this point in time. So, okay, cool. Hopefully, you have checked your email this morning. I sent out an email that has some lecture materials on it. Should be a PDF file of a PowerPoint presentation that I've given several versions of over the last 2 or 3 years. This one that you have is the latest version that I gave on Capitol Hill last October to a room full of congressional staffers and so on. So that's what we're going to take a look at this morning. We'll start talking about horses a little bit, horses and burros. Can't forget the burros. And I've got it up on my PC here next to me. Hopefully you can pull it up on yours, whatever you're looking at on your laptop, and we can kind of refer. You don't have to look at me while I'm talking. You can just sort of look at the file as you've got it pulled up. So go ahead and pull it up if you haven't done that yet. Also on the email, there was a PDF of a journal article that we published in 2018, I believe was the published date. It has it's not exactly up to date with the number of horses that we have right now, but it has a lot of statistics in it to kind of give you an idea of where we are in terms of wild horse and burro populations across the West. And it also has in it a novel idea for trying to create a public-private partnership for long-term holding with respect to wild horses and burros. We're sitting right now at about, the official numbers are about 88,000 wild horses and burros on the ground. I got a question here, the 2018 or 2019. I don't know what the dates are. Probably the 2019 one is probably the PowerPoint presentation. So I think that's probably what it is. So that's the one that you're gonna really need to take a look at. So when you get it open, it starts with the science of foraging and grazing management. Okay, so Summit 2019, that's the one that you want to look at. So again, go ahead and get into pulling that one up. Where was I? We've got about the journal article that I'm referring to now has a lot of the statistics in it. We're going to have to update the statistics. Right now, we've got about 88,000 is the official number. In about 3 months, we're going to have 20% more than that on the ground. So we're going to have well in excess of 100,000 horses. AML, appropriate management level, range wide, is about 26,000 and change for horses. And so, do the math. We're going to be sitting at 112 to 115,000 horses and burros probably, and AML is at 26,000 and change. So we're going to, at some point in time here, there's going to be roughly, uh, if you count the horses that are in long-term holding right now, which is about 45 to 50,000, we're going to, in order to get down to AML, um, pretty quick here, we're going to be looking at well in excess of 100,000 horses that we would have to do something with, and and the only pathway that we have legally, and the only pathway that makes sense, and the only pathway that I and others have been pushing for a long time, is a non-lethal way out of it. And if it's non-lethal, that means you've got to either run animals down an adoption corridor, or you've got to run them into long-term holding. Those are really your only two choices. And so we adopted last year, BLM, Bureau of Land Management, adopted 7,100 horses and change, a little over 7,100 horses, a little over 7,000 horses last year. That's the most they have ever adopted out. So the adoption demand is undoubtedly going to go down this year, given the economics and the coronavirus and so on and so forth. And so the adoption demand is never going to be able to handle the excess horses. So we're going to have to run those horses into long-term holding. And so what is the way out of that? How can we do that? How can we ease the burden of the taxpayer, which is you? How can we ease your burden in long-term holding? We've got horses, you run a horse in that's 10 years old, it may live another 20 years at $2 a head per day. You can see what the cost is going to be, and there's some cost numbers in the journal article that you can look at as well. So this is sort of a first foray into this horse and burro issue that you're going to be looking at much more closely. I think by Wednesday I'm going to send out the assignment, this interview assignment. I'm still waiting on one person to get back to me, and we will move on from there. But this is going to be your first foray into it. I think I sent you a link the other day. I can't remember what I did. I've been doing homework ever since like last Thursday. So anyway, this is sort of part of the research that you're going to need for this project that's coming up that I'll introduce to you on Wednesday. Looks like I've got a chat question here. Some rumors that some of those 7,000 were adopted by kill buyers. Is there any truth to that? Or is it merely propaganda? It's propaganda. Period. Propaganda. There's always misinformation out there about horses. Now, if something slipped by that no one knows about, really, that is sometimes is possible. It has been in the past. But to my knowledge, this time around last year, none of these animals went to kill buyers. There was no intention of sending animals to kill buyers. The Bureau of Land Management has no intention of sending to kill buyers, period. End of story. So anything you hear otherwise, that the BLM is in cahoots with someone, is just a bunch of nonsense. And there's plenty of that goes on out there in cyberspace when it comes to some of these entities, these so-called horse advocacy groups. So this is sort of a first foray into that. There'll be once we get to the exam, there will be a couple of questions, I'm sure, on there about what we're going to talk about today a little bit. So anyway, you're going to be looking at horses quite a bit. It's a big challenge right now. And it affects everyone, whether you think it affects you or not. It does. Take my word for it. And so we are on our way to getting. We were on our way before everything was upended by the virus here. We were on our way to get some really good things done. and we'll see whether that continues now into the future. But in the meantime, we've got to maintain the momentum that we have for dealing with this challenge in a humane way. So hopefully by now you've been able to pull up the PowerPoint PDF that begins there with the science of foraging and grazing management and examples of free roaming equid habitat degradation. So we're talking about interactions the other day, right? And that's sort of interactions in the name of the class or course description. So we're going to look at some real life interactions today between wild horses and burros and their habitat, and subsequently the other critters that share those habitats. So what you're looking at here with this first slide, this title slide here, is a bunch of Przewalski horses up on the Przewalski reintroduction range in northwest China, almost to the Russian Mongolian border, Kazakhstan border. It's very close up there in the Jungar Basin, right in the middle. I won't say right in the middle. It is in the territory where the largest coal mining operation in the world is. And so I don't know what percentage of China's coal comes from this region, but right now this area, this habitat area, is protected from mining. We'll see how that goes. China uses a tremendous amount of coal, and they're not going to stop using coal. No one is going to stop them from using coal, take my word for it. And a lot of the climate change uproar, until you can figure out how to get a billion Chinese, or more than a billion now, to stop burning coal somehow or another, nothing's going to change. And so the alternative for them to burn is wood, and that's not what we want. I mean, is that what you really want? So this is up there in that region. And again, this habitat area is protected from mining operations right now, at least at this point. So what you see in this picture, other than Przewalski horses, and they're pretty cool, is you see habitat. This is sort of a sandy kind of a habitat, most of it, sandy loam type soils. But what you see in terms of forage available is you see a lot of forage out there. I mean, this is really, really well managed habitat area. They have done, I have to give it to them, they have done a fantastic job to this point managing this habitat area for Przewalski horses. And of course, there's other species up there. There's Gorded gazelle, a lot of them, and there's also Kulons, and I'll show you some pictures of some Kulons. Kulons are the colloquial name for Asian wild asses. So we'll see some of them in just a minute here, but this habitat is really, really nice. You see that little gray species there, sort of in the foreground. That is Artemisia filifolia. It's a diffuse sagebrush. They do have sagebrush species over there, and then you see a lot of stipa grasses in the background, and you see it just looks really like really good habitat, and it is good habitat. It's being managed quite well. The second slide that you see there is another look at a broader look at the habitat, and you still see that same trend. You see a lot of grasses, really productive grass areas. There's also some aristidas out there, and of course we share a few species as well, like crested wheatgrass and false wheatgrass and some things like that, which is not, don't get too carried away with that. But the habitat just looks really nice, and you see even over in the distance there some taller shrubs, some little poplar trees. They're growing around a watering point over there. So it's really well managed habitat. Now in the third slide, what you see are some more Przewalski horses, but these are Przewalski horses on a provincial uh, wildlife management area in Uzbekistan. And this area, if you'll notice, in the foreground, you'll see some shrubs that have no leaves on them. You'll see a lot of bare ground. I see a lot of sort of old false wheatgrass scattered around in there. This is an example of habitat with Przewalski horses that is not well managed. It's not managed as well as they would like for it to be managed. They don't quite have the resources that they would like to have to be able to manage it. But nevertheless, the habitat is just, the carrying capacity is just not there with respect to all of the animals that they have. And you can look at that picture and you can see it quite easily. If you'll look at the next picture, which is picture 4 on the slide tray there, this is just, I just turned around the other direction and took this picture. And so you can see that this is not nearly as productive. It's not nearly as well managed as what we saw with the Chinese habitat area. So again, this is in Uzbekistan, and this is just, I mean, this is tough. You look at this and you just go, my goodness, that is just, the habitat is just beat up, and it is. It's just, that's just hard to take. It's just eaten down to the dirt. And you think, well, maybe this is an anomaly in the world. Well, possibly. But I want you to keep this slide in mind as we move through the rest of the presentation today, and think about it when we get to the end. The 5th slide is some of that same habitat area, the provincial park in Uzbekistan, and what you see there are some kulons. These are Asian wild asses. This is as close as I've ever been able to get to them. They don't call them wild asses for nothing. I guarantee you that. But what you see some ears there on the horizon on a couple of the critters. But notice the habitat there in the foreground. It's just almost non-existent. It's very, very overused habitat in this provincial wildlife park preservation area. Okay, the next slide, number 6, is a little bit closer to home. This is up at Steens Mountain, north of here in Oregon. Notice this is a part of what's called the Kiger herd. You can Google that up later if you want to. This is a public-private partnership managed area. They manage the horse populations very, very tightly between the BLM and some NGOs, 1 or 2 NGOs. I can't remember exactly who's involved in it anymore. But what you see is habitat area. This is a watering point, and typically watering points are a point of contention when it comes to habitat degradation, because everybody's got to get a drink of water, right? So you got wild horses, you got elk, you got domestic cattle, and so on that are all competing for water and resources around the water. But if you notice this looks really nice. There's lots of ground cover there. The horses look good. They're in good shape. They're really doing a good job managing this herd up at Steens Mountain in Oregon. Now, here's one of the problems that we have with respect to habitat, and we're talking about sort of a range-wide conceptual idea of it. We have a lot of so-called horse advocacy groups that are advocating that if we just took cattle and sheep off the land, there'd be more habitat for horses and burros. And we just let them go. We don't need to manage their populations. They'd be self-regulated. And if we just turned them loose, everything would be great. Well, you've just seen some examples of well-managed areas, and in one example, at least at this point, of a not so well-managed area. And so if we just take cattle and sheep off so that we can have more horses, I got quoted in National Geographic a couple of years ago, and this was the quote that they picked up on. If you've got a box and then you got dysfunctionality in the box, and that's what we have right now. If you've got dysfunctionality in the box and you take that dysfunctionality out of the box and you just put it in a bigger box, all you got is dysfunctionality in a bigger box. You haven't fixed anything. Somebody's trying to get a hold of me this morning, it seems. And so if we do that, eventually something's going to happen. Eventually we're going to run into one of these decade-long droughts that we have in the state of Nevada and the Intermountain West. And horses that are on the brink, when this habitat that they use dries up and goes away, and our numbers are so high, we're going to end up killing horses by the thousands. And we already have examples of that in the late 1980s, early 1990s, even in Nevada, down on the north end of the horse range, down at Nellis Air Force Base. We had somewhere in one incident, there were about 6,000 horses down there on the north end of that range, and at least 3,000 to 3,500 of them died, starved to death or choked down. Most of them choked down for lack of water. And I've got an old video of that. I'm going to let that ring and let them hang on. I've got an old video of that I got from the veterinarians that were in charge of cleaning up the mess down there, and it's horrible. It's unconscionable what was going on down there. When you have that many animals, if you can imagine 3,000 animals or more, all starving and choked down for lack of water, just laying around all over the ground. It's just unconscionable. And so that's where we're headed, given the circumstances that we have right now. So the next slide, which is slide number 8 on the list, we've talked about this before. We talked about it last week. Was the latest. There's 3 components to the science of foraging and grazing management. It's timing, its duration, and its intensity. And so we're going to kind of review this very quickly, and then we're going to get on and start looking at some habitat issues, some pictures of some habitat issues. So let's look at these one at a time. Once again, for domestic grazers, cattle and sheep primarily is what we're talking about. On public lands, timing. When are animals out there? How long are they out there? And how many are out there? That's timing, duration, and intensity. So when are domestic grazers out on our public lands? Well, it's regulated by permit. You turn out on a certain date. You have a little bit of a window. Usually it's about 2 weeks. So if you have a permit turnout date for your on your permit of April the 1st, usually you can turn out anywhere from about March the 15th to about April the 15th. So, but it's regulated. It's highly regulated. You're told when you can turn out, and you're told when you must go and gather your animals. So you may be on a permit that has a 3-month seasonal grazing. It may be a 3-month seasonal grazing permit. It may be 4, it may be 5. In some cases in the Intermountain West, Colorado, places like that, sometimes you might even see a 6-month grazing permit. But animals are specifically told, or ranchers, permit holders are specifically told when they can turn their animals out and when they've got to go get their animals and get them off. Okay? Once again, that sort of relates to how long are the animals out there. They're out there, they're permitted. the time that they're out, when you can turn out and when you can get off, it's all permitted. It's all highly regulated. And the number of animals that you can turn out each year on your permit is highly regulated. There is a specific number that you're supposed to turn out for. And so it's permitted. Your AUMs, your animal unit months, are permitted, and it's permitted on an annual basis. If you mess up 2 or 3 years in a row and you turn out too many animals and they catch you, they'll cite you, and eventually they can pull your permit. Okay? So it's highly regulated, and there are consequences to not following the rules with these 3 components. Okay? So that's your domestic grazers. Let's go to the next slide. It'll be slide number 10. What about wild big game grazers and browsers like elk and antelope and deer? Well, when are they out there? Well, they're out there year round. We can't tell them when to turn out and when to get off. We can't control the timing at all. And so they're just out there. They live out there 12 months out of the year. But we can, when it comes to how many animals or the intensity, once again, of grazing and foraging, we control the number of animals by the issuance of hunting tags. And those hunting tags manipulate the population numbers. Now, when you're talking about elk, for instance, or deer, we have these population swings, but they try to keep the populations fairly stable so that they can have a guaranteed hunt every year, a guaranteed number of permits, that at least a closely guaranteed number of permits that people can go out and take advantage of. And so when we get into, for instance, a wildfire situation or a drought situation, what the Fish and Game entities in each individual state may do is if things get tough, they may issue more permits and increase the harvest so they control those numbers down. Of course, they do this in conjunction with predators. We still have some predators that can take a toll on elk and mule deer, white-tailed deer in some cases, and antelope. Depending on where you are, there's more predator pressure, of course, in places like the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, where they still got bears and wolves and more mountain lions than we do here in the state of Nevada, for instance. But they take all of those things into consideration when they're developing population models and when they're developing harvest models. And so it's highly regulated. The number of big game wildlife species out there is highly regulated. We know what those populations are. We know how to manipulate them. If things get better after a wildfire or a drought and the populations begin to increase, and they reach this sort of safe level of population numbers, then your game and fish entities may issue more permits in order to make sure that wildlife population doesn't overheat and get too big. So it's starting to have a negative effect on the habitat quality. Okay, so domestic species, wildlife species. Let's move to the next slide. Our free-roaming equids, our horses and burros. Well, much like big game animals, we can't control when they're out there. We can't control what time of the year they're out there. They're out there 12 months out of the year. So the only thing that we have at our disposal is to try and control the grazing intensity. And we do that by the gather process. So when theoretically, the way this works is you have a designated appropriate management level, an upper range and a lower range of it. And once it gets above the upper range, you should be going out and gathering horses and burros to keep that population within that appropriate management level, that AML, that range of animals. Theoretically, that's how it should work. And in some cases, we use contraception. Contraception is going to play a larger role in the future. But contraception has some issues with it. One, is product. How much product do you need? Can you go and find 40,000 doses of PZP, which PZP is a problem now? I think I sent you, I'm not sure what I sent. Did I send you a lawsuit uh, from the Friends of Animals against the Humane Society and PZP? Did I send that out to you guys yet? Just drop me the deal on the live chat, and if I didn't, I'll try and get it out to you today. Um, okay, I did send it. All right, be sure you read that. Okay, this stuff that I'm sending you, you're going to need to do your research before you begin calling somebody for an interview, which is what you're going to be doing. The contraception is going to play a larger role, I believe, in the only way when we start looking at population levels, when we start trying to model populations over the next 10 years to get our overall herds down to AML, gathering won't do it, contraception won't do it, but a combination of gathering and contraception works in the models. And so there's a number of products out there that can serve as contraception. There's also spaying and neutering techniques that are available or on the open market anyway. So that's what we have. Those are the only two ways right now that we have to control wild horse and burro populations, is through the gather processes and through contraception or a combination of the two. Now, anything that truncates, that inhibits our ability to go out and control these populations, anything like lawsuits, like right now, if for instance, if an advocacy group filed and they found a sympathetic judge to stop all of the gathers, let's just pretend that would stop all of the gathers for just 1 year. What are the circumstances? What is the outcome of just that 1 year of not being able to control the population? Well, we know we've got about 100,000 horses right now, right? If we stopped it for 1 year, we've got 120,000 horses next year because of that 20% population growth, or that 5% fecundity rate. So we're dealing with 20,000 animals. Have you ever seen 20,000 of anything? And so the outcome of anything that truncates or stops us or inhibits our ability to control these populations now, we see geometric growth. We're on that growth curve stage. We're up here on the growth curve. So each year we get a geometric growth in our horse populations. So 5 years from now, we'll have double what we've got now. So if we don't do something in 5 years, we'll have 200,000 horses. If we don't do something in 10 years, we'll have 400,000 horses and burros to have to contend with. So anything that inhibits us to control these numbers creates our problem. Okay, there's some additional considerations that most people don't take into account. We haven't talked about grazing systems yet. We're going to do a brief run on grazing systems either later this week or first of next week. Grazing rotation systems, we put up fences for domestic animals. We do water development. Horses take advantage of that. We put out salt and mineral stations sometimes to move animals, domestic animals, around on the landscape. And so we do a lot of things like that for our domestic animals, in addition to just the permits. We do a lot of things to try and increase distribution on the landscape so that we don't have nick points of overuse. And we also have, there's this other thing called predator pressure. Occasionally, for wild animals, big game animals, We do have some predator pressure, coyotes, um, primarily. Um, Depending on where you are, in some places like Greater Yellowstone and other places, they have more bears, they have a few more mountain lions. That can take a toll on big game populations. But the issue when it comes to horses, we have very few predators. There's a few in a few different horse management areas in a few different states where we do have mountain lions that'll still take a few horses every year. We have some here locally that do this up in the Virginia range, just over here east of Reno. But we, for the most part, we just don't have the predator pressure necessary to control horse populations, not even to control them, to even make a dent in horse populations. Lots of HMAs, there's just absolutely no predator pressure at all. And so we have to kind of, it's just some other things to think about when we're talking about managing these species. The next slide, just a slide of my colleague John Wilker. We actually, for domestic animals, we move animals around by horseback. We mash cows. We improve that distribution. We take them out of areas where we don't want them, and move them to other areas where we want them to be. And so, just a picture of another tool that we use to manage domestic animal populations with that we can't do for wild animals or for wild horses and burros. The next slide is a graph here taken out of Grayson's book, 2016 book. And this is the number of occurrences of extinct late Pleistocene mammal genera known from the Great Basin. And the ones that have asterisks, they're biomarked genera that have been securely dated to between 12 and 10,000 years ago. And so what you'll see on this graph is that for a long time, horses are pretty well adapted to this part of the world. The Great Basin habitat, the plant communities that are here now that wild horses and burros take advantage of, are the same basic plant communities that have been here since the end of the Pleistocene, and in some cases before the end of the Pleistocene. So horses were doing really, really well up until the megafauna die-off. We see more horses in the archaeological record than we see any other species. So horses can do really well in the Great Basin. The habitat fits their physiology very well, very well. So that's what this graph is in here for. The next slide, a couple of other considerations: nutritional quality of the habitat, diet selection, and habitat preference. If you remember back to the first of the semester, we talked a lot about those kinds of things. Grazing animals select diets. They learn from their mothers and their peers. They select diets that are higher in nutrition than there is available on average in the habitat. They learn from their mothers, their peers. They learn by just tasting stuff. And then instinctive avoidance. We really don't have a lot of scientific evidence for that. Typically what an animal does is it eats something, it doesn't feel well, and so it doesn't eat it again. It's kind of like you guys, going to wherever, someplace and eating something and getting sick the next day, and you just don't want to go back there ever again. Or eat that same thing ever again. So there's just a few other considerations to think about there. There's a great little thing there. Sometimes kids are started out on certain kinds of foods at a very early age, and they grow up eating things that are great. They think they're great, and if your palate hasn't been subjected to it, you may not think it's as great as they do. Well, let's look at some preferred habitats here. Some preferred habitat information quick about horses. And these are important ones to kind of remember, okay? In arid areas with low habitat diversity. Okay, if you got an area that's really dry, there's not a lot of habitat diversity, water usually is the determining factor for habitat selection. In other words, where is the water? and they will select around that water more than they will any other place. And otherwise, there's really no preference that's expressed. It's arid areas. There's just not a lot of habitat diversity, so they can't express selectivity. Okay, if all you have to eat is ramen noodles, you can't express selectivity. If you don't have any pizza, you can't eat it. Right? So, in semi-arid areas with habitat diversity, if you have some diversification of your habitats, and you do have water as well, forage attributes determine habitat selection. In other words, what is the most succulent habitat? They'll spend more time there. So they really prefer riparian areas. We all like to have picnics on riparian areas, right? And wet meadows over drier uplands. It'd rather be down next to the water. And in a study, Kelly Crane, a colleague of mine, back in the 90s, there's some new stuff out now on habitat selection with horses, but he found that 21% of the use occurred in 1% of the study area along riparian zones in the Green Mountain area there out of the south of Jeffrey City in Wyoming. So horses do, when they can, they will express a preference, and that preference is around riparian zones for the most part, sub-irrigated meadows where there's succulent vegetation, particularly in the summertime when it's hot. Now look at this selectivity here. In this next slide, this is slide number 18. This is an area down in the southwestern corner of Utah. And you see this line of vegetation over there on the left-hand side of the slide. What these horses have done is they have everything that is succulent, that is being sort of sub-irrigated in this area. You see that spring back there. Everything that is succulent, all the plants that can take advantage, even the stuff in the foreground, that can take advantage of some of that sub-irrigated moisture, at least sometime during the growing season, they've eaten it down, and you get to the dry stuff right there by the gate, and that's not grazed that way because the gate was closed. That's a fence. That's not a gate. They stopped grazing there because the succulence of the vegetation got lousy. So that's how good their selectivity can be. That's how acute their selectivity can be in an area like this. Okay? I read a publication in Wildlife Journal here. It's been several years ago now that claimed that wild horse studs don't make stud piles to mark their territories. It's just a random act. Don't ask me how that thing got published, but nevertheless, that's for free. So what does overpopulation of one species mean for another species that depend upon shared habitat areas? Again, that interaction, right? In the case of federally owned equids, what does it mean, the overpopulation of federally owned equids? What does that mean for a species that share those same habitats, or at least would like to share those same habitats? Okay, we're going to look at a series of pictures here of habitat pictures. Here's the uplands. This is the Dolly Varden Range down at Spruce Mountain over in eastern Nevada. This is a almost an exclusively horse-used area. Look at the trailing in the uplands. That is a disturbance on the landscape that causes topsoil to become loosened and to blow. Okay? And this is all from horse overpopulation. Another shot of that. Look at those trails. That's habitat degradation. You never get something like that with wild big game or with domestic animals. They're not allowed to do those kinds of things. That's an upland habitat interaction. This is another upland. This is an exclosure, a grazing exclosure on your right. This is slide number 22. This is a white sage flat area over south of Eureka, Nevada, and notice inside the grazing exclosure, this is an area that is only grazed by horses. The cattle have been pulled out of this thing for years. In fact, from here on out, all these rest of these slides that you're going to see are areas that cattle have not been in for at least 20 to 30 years, because there's no reason to turn cattle out. There's nothing for cattle to eat. And so the permittees have been taking voluntary non-use. So just imagine if you had a permit to use something, but you couldn't use it. You just voluntarily said, look, I'm not going to use it. There's no reason for me to turn my animals out. So you see the difference there. Inside the grazing exclosure and outside the grazing exclosure. This is a riparian zone. This is over near Duckwater, Moody Springs in Nevada. This is an area that has had no cattle on it for probably 30 years, as best we can tell. And look at this habitat. This was a riparian meadow, but the horses have just beat it up. They beat it up, they pawed out, they've eaten all the vegetation, they pawed out the spring. We've lost topsoil. When they start pawing out the spring, they lose topsoil, the wind blows, it blows the topsoil away. How are you going to mitigate something like this? How would you mitigate that? If you know, tell me, because nobody else in the world knows how to mitigate something like this once this habitat damage has reached this point. Here's another shot over in White Pine County, 2018. Look at this. This is a sub-irrigated, spring-fed meadow. Look at the habitat loss. Look at the soil loss. We've lost maybe 8 feet of soil here. That's never going to recover. Not in our lifetime. Maybe 1,000 years it might recover. But even if you went in and reseeded this, it's never going to have the same ecological potential that it had prior to the disturbance, before the horses got there. No cattle have been in this area for 30 years. There's a close-up of it. All of that head cut there that you see, that little cliff, is from horses pawing out the spring and then the wind coming along and blowing the soil away. Okay. This is a perennial spring this is Frenchy Creek over in Crescent Valley in Nevada. This is a perennial stream. This is a perennial stream. Just horses. Now, in case you think it might look different the other way, that's what it looks like the other direction. This is a perennial stream. It's just nuked from horse use. Let that one soak in for a second. All right, this is Oriana Springs over around Caliente. This is a spring. Notice this little foal there that's looked like he's about to keel over. Notice all of the habitat degradation there. There's no grass. They've just beat it all up. They pawed out the spring. The spring is dried up, and it just looks like somebody nuked the place. There it is up a little closer. That was a perennial spring source. But due to the horse populations, they have damaged it to the point where it's no longer flowing. There's no vegetation around the area. The topsoil is gone off of those rocky points there. And so it's just, how do you mitigate something like that? The ecological potential is never going to be the same on these types of sites. So I'm going to leave it with that one. We got a few more that we want to look at, and then we're going to kind of talk a little bit about it at our next lecture, and go on from there. So be paying attention to your emails that I send out. I'm working my way through the homework. I'm about 3/4 of the way through homework 4. I'm going to hope to get that done today, and then I'll start weighing in on homework 5. So be sure you get the homework 5 to me today by 5 o'clock if you haven't sent it in yet. Get it to me by close of business today, and if I send it back to you it's probably because something's not quite right and you might want to fix it. So we'll see how fast I can get through everything. So, okay, unless there's a question, I'll sign off. I'll wait here. I have questions on homework 5. Are we going to get the chance to revise those again like number 4? I am going to do the best I can to do that. We're going to see what we can do. Like I say, if you get something back from me, you might want to fix it. If I say I got it or it's okay or something like that, that means it looks pretty good. So just kind of keep that in mind. Any other questions? Okay, seeing nothing, I will sign off at this point. If you do have questions or something, you can always email me as well. So continue avoiding everybody and staying safe and staying well. And we'll see you on Wednesday. Ta-ta.